The following is a legal advertisement from Gwendolyn J. Sterk and the Family Law Group. This does not constitute legal advice and should not be construed as such. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only.
I'm Gwendolyn J. Sterk with Gwendolyn J. Sterk of the Family Law Group, and I'm here today with Ragan Freitag. And we're here to have a discussion today about what is abuse. That's an open-ended question.
Yeah, a little bit. A little scary. I mean, where are we going to go with this?
Well, I think that the word comes up in almost every consultation recently, it seems like. And maybe it's just because people are perceiving any action taken by their spouse as abuse. And I'm not talking about gender-related. I'm talking about both sides.
And, you know, abuse isn't just physical. I mean, there's different ways that you can manipulate and hurt someone.
Absolutely. So, you know, there's a famous, it's called the cycle of abuse. And I would challenge anybody listening to this to go online and look for that to be able to get some research, because there are these different types of abuse. And clearly physical abuse is probably the most obvious, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's going to lead you down the path to a domestic battery charge or a battery charge, you know, and yeah, exactly.
But in that violent section, I also want to make sure that we're talking about whether you strike someone that you're in a relationship or a spouse, whether you hit, you strike, you pull, you punch, you put them up on a table, you knock them down the stairs. There's a lot of different ways. Also remember that physical abuse can be manifested in other ways. Punching a hole in a wall.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's threatening, or blocking somebody so they can't leave a situation, or how about taking away somebody's phone for their ability to call 911. That's
absolutely
scary.
Right. Taking the phone, blocking them. You know, we always say to people, if there is this possibility or if you're fearful of it, always have a safety plan in place. And we'll talk about that in another podcast on what is a good safety plan to put in place so that you have that level of safety, that to the extent that you can get it. So there's physical abuse, but I think that you touched on it earlier, that there's a lot of different areas of abuse where you find it in a relationship. And you know, you have to be careful, because what I may see as emotional abuse is an emotional abuse for somebody else. Fair?
Right. I think everybody has their different threshold and sensitivity, or what they feel is appropriate. But I also think some people let the abuse go on too long and they don't even know it's abuse.
Right, because it becomes part of their pattern of behavior. So they almost become codependent on it. And I'm not a psychologist. That's not what we're here to talk about, codependency. But we're saying to you is that the experience has been that what you consider to be the conduct of your spouse is your new norm. And so when you make it your new norm, you accept that as appropriate behavior. But the warning signs should be out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, you know, when you start crying yourself to sleep every night, when you're scared to go home, where you're scared to be late coming home from work because you're going to walk into a situation where you're going to either be hit or be verbally abused.
Right, and there are those different levels. And, you know, every conduct, you know, you can't judge people. And so I think that this is an area when we're talking about the emotional or the verbal abuse where you have to really take it on a case-by-case basis. You know, because we've all had those situations where you have the loudmouths, right?
Oh, yeah.
And those loudmouths loudmouth 1 might marry loudmouth 2. Fair?
I agree. That's actually what I was just going to say is you may be also participating in this, but then does the level rise a little too high on the other side?
I get it, but think about it from the other hand. When you're judging somebody, be careful, because that might be their means of communication. You know, you take different personalities. You take 2 type A personalities, put them in a room, they're probably going to have a screaming match, but it's not abuse because they're just talking. That's their way of communicating. But on the other hand, you take a type A personality and then somebody who's very timid, and that abuse is used to put somebody down. So there's a different level. Is it a good old-fashioned argument, or is it demeaning for a purpose to achieve somebody into intimidation, to being scared, to engage in conduct that's unrealistic? related.
Yeah, because two lawyers screaming and yelling at each other in the courtroom, that's not necessarily abuse, right?
Absolutely. Although some people would like to label it as abuse or put some kind of label on somebody, it's somebody doing their job. So you have to be able to differentiate. But on the same time, we understand that there's emotional abuse. And you take your spouse as you find them. And that's the other thing why I want people not to be so judgmental about it on one level, because it might be abusive for somebody. There might be somebody who has a very timid relationship. So somebody coming in and criticizing them every day about you don't do anything right. These are the things that need to be addressed. When it gets to the point that you can't do anything right, you can't feel any good self-esteem, you're losing yourself, you don't have any friends, the alienation that occur, all of that are important elements and should be warning signs to you that it's time to do something.
And when it starts to affect other people like your children, I mean, that's a big sign.
Absolutely. And I'm an advocate that children know more about the abuse and more of the breakdown of the marriage than parents ever give them credit for. I think they know it early on, as early as, the 1-year-old, the 2-year-old, close to your body, feels that stress, and they know.
Exactly. And they don't necessarily, it's like you said, it's not necessarily seeing the physical abuse. It's not necessarily hearing the words, but they feel that tension between mom and dad or, girlfriends and boyfriends.
Absolutely. So we talked about physical, we talked about emotional, but I don't want to forget other areas where there also are signs of abuse. And the next one I want to talk about is financial.
Financial. Like being in control of somebody's finances?
Absolutely. It's the control level. So let's distinguish this. As a divorce attorney, I find that one person in a relationship generally takes on the role of managing the finances, and the other person, takes on managing something else in the home or in their life. That's not what I'm talking about. Just because you pay the bills, that's not financial abuse. There's a different level. Financial abuse is where you hold that economic reality over the other person's head. You can't spend. You got to account to me for everything you do. You're not going to know. Money's not in your name. All those elements.
Yeah, I mean, that's holding their life, their money hostage. I mean, if somebody wants to go grocery shopping, they have to ask. If they want to, go to a movie, they have to ask. I mean, that seems a little too tedious.
And in addition to that, it's also knowing just the finances in general. So let's say that it's not that going on, but you feel that there's a breakdown in your relationship and you go to your spouse and say, hey, can we just outline what our financial future looks like? There should be the ability to have that information. Somebody shouldn't be intimidated to say, well, you don't need to know. No, you do need to know. You have to get your house in order and understand what the finances are as well as anybody else.
Especially if there's kids. I mean, nowadays, oh my goodness, how expensive is it to put your kids through college, and say one of the spouses is hiding money or has dwindled an account away, and now it's time to put your kid through college. That, again, this abuse trickles down.
It does trickle down, and in addition to that, you could find yourself in a devastating position with debt that you don't know about. So running your credit report on a regular basis, making sure that you're on an equal playing field with your spouse, so to speak, so that both of you can move on. Think about it this way. If your spouse were to die, you'd need to know this information. So why wouldn't you know it just in general for purposes of your day-to-day operations?
That is a very good point. What about if there's gambling or money issues in the relationship?
Absolutely. You could be facing bankruptcy and not know it. A lot of people run up credit cards. It's a one way that people hide things from the other spouse. That's why having that information and making sure there's an open exchange of it is very important in the relationship to make sure that you skirt by the abuse. So if you're feeling like you've been a victim of abuse and you're feeling that there's some type of, first of all, if there is physical abuse, get help immediately. Get an order of protection, make a plan, and get out. There's no cure for that. There are situations where somebody can truly reform themselves, but you've got to take steps and you need professional help with that. Secondly, if there's emotional abuse that's tearing down you and you've got to build yourself up, then you need to do something about that. Seeing a counselor, seeing what your options are with a divorce, etc. And the same thing is true with the financial.
And you can protect yourself before going into a marriage by getting a prenup. You can actually get a post-nup, right?
You can get a post-nup under certain circumstances, and those are things that are options. And remember, at the end of the day, a marriage takes two people to work in. So you can't force your spouse to be in that relationship with you, and I think that that's sometimes what happens. And so somebody takes that level of control and they blow it out of proportion, and it becomes a cloud over the next person's head. And getting out of that cloud is a devastating long-term process.
And if you get into that situation, attorneys can help you get out of it. There's way to hold the accounts in escrow. There's ways to prevent people from spending the money, or what we call dissipating money. And that's good to know, because maybe you're already in that situation. We can help you get out.
That's right. All right, so that's what abuse is, and it's a scary thing. So our information to everybody today is knowledge is power. Obtain that knowledge that you can get to move forward with your life.
The proceeding was a legal advertisement from Gwendolyn J. Sterk and the Family Law Group.